The night Marcus walked up his porch steps, shoulders slumped and heart hollow. He had no idea that the words about to leave his neighbor's lips would change the entire course of his life. He had just spent 3 hours across a candlelit table from a woman he was desperately trying to love, minus trying being the cruelest word in the English language when it comes to matters of the heart. His tie was loosened, his smile was gone, and the only thing keeping him upright was the cold night air hitting his face, like an honest friend. He didn't expect anyone to be watching. He never did, but she was always there. She had always been there. If you believe in second chances, in quiet love that waits without asking for anything in return minus hit that like button, share this story, drop a comment below, and subscribe to this channel. Someone in your life needs to hear this today. Marcus had moved into the little cream-colored house on Birchwood Lane 3 years ago after his divorce. The kind of divorce that doesn't arrive with screaming and door slamming, but with silence minus the slow, suffocating silence of two people who had simply stopped seeing each other. He'd packed 2 boxes, a coffee maker, and a photograph of his late mother, and he told himself that starting over at 42 was not the end of something. It was the beginning. He repeated that to himself every morning, like a prayer he wasn't sure he believed. His neighbor Diane lived in the yellow house directly to his left. She was 40, a kindergarten teacher with paint-stained fingers and a garden that rioted with color every spring. She had a laugh that sounded like it came from somewhere deep and genuine, the kind of laugh that made strangers on the street turn around and smile, without knowing why. She lived alone 2 minus had for 5 years, since her own chapter of heartbreak had quietly closed. They had become friends the way neighbors sometimes do minus slowly, naturally, without ceremony. Borrowed sugar became evening coffee on the porch. Evening coffee became long conversations that stretched past midnight. Long conversations became the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly know each other. But Marcus never saw it. That was the tragedy of him. He was the kind of man who could look directly at a sunrise and spend the whole time worrying about the weather forecast. For the past year, he had been trying minus that word again minus to find love through a dating app his younger coworker had installed on his phone during a lunch break. He went on dates with women who were perfectly lovely, perfectly kind, perfectly wrong. There was the architect who talked only about open floor plans, the librarian who cried about her ex-husband by the second drink, the yoga instructor who kept checking her phone every 4 minutes. Marcus came home from each of these evenings feeling more alone than when he had left, sitting on his porch and staring at the stars like they owed him an explanation. Diane would sometimes see him there and bring out 2 mugs of chamomile tea without asking. She never pushed him to talk about the dates. She never rolled her eyes or offered unsolicited advice. She just sat beside him in the dark and let him feel what he needed to feel. And somehow, that was always exactly enough. He would eventually start talking minus about the disappointment, about the loneliness, about the terrifying feeling that maybe he was simply not built for love anymore. And Diane would listen with her whole body, leaning slightly forward, her eyes never leaving his face. She would say thoughtful, careful things. She would make him laugh at precisely the right moment. And then she would go back inside her yellow house, and Marcus would watch her porch light flick off. And he would feel simultaneously better and inexplicably empty. He never once connected those 2 feelings to her. The night everything changed, Marcus had been on a date with a woman named Lydia, minus A, financial consultant with sharp eyes and sharper conversation. She was impressive in every measurable way. Attractive, successful, witty. On paper, she was exactly what Marcus thought he was looking for. But across the dinner table, watching her speak with such polished confidence, Marcus felt nothing warm. No pull, no electricity. Just the quiet, aching awareness that he was performing the idea of wanting someone rather than actually wanting her. They parted with a polite hug and vague promises of a second date that both of them knew would never happen. He drove home in silence, the radio off, the windows cracked. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a long moment, forehead nearly touching the steering wheel. He was tired, not the tired that sleep fixes minus the tired that lives in the chest. He dragged himself up the porch steps, loosening his tie with one hand, and that is when he saw her. Diane was sitting in her porch chair, wrapped in a thick cardigan the color of autumn leaves, a book open in her lap, the warm amber light from her porch lamp falling across her face. She looked up when she heard him and smiled, minus that effortless, uncomplicated smile she always had for him, and asked how the date went. Marcus exhaled a long breath and shook his head slowly. He told her it was fine. He told her Lydia was great. Really, on every level she was great, but that something just wasn't there. He told her, with a tired half-laugh, that he didn't know what was wrong with him, that he kept going on these dates and coming home feeling like a man searching for something he couldn't even name. He sat down on his own porch steps, still in his dress shirt, staring at the quiet street. And then Diane did something she had never done before. She closed her book. She set it down very deliberately on the small table beside her chair. She stood up and walked to the low fence that separated their yards, minus the little white picket fence that Marcus had helped her repaint. 2 summers ago, and she held onto the top of it with both hands and looked at him with an expression he had never quite seen on her face before. Steady, clear, terrifyingly honest. She said she needed to tell him something, and that she needed him to really hear it. She told him that she had watched him come home from date after date for months, watched him sit on that porch searching the sky for answers, watched him pour his hoping into women who didn't know the way he took his coffee, or that he always read the last page of a book first, or that he hummed old Motown songs when he was doing the dishes. And she told him, minus her voice quiet but unwavering, the bravest thing Marcus had ever witnessed, minus that she didn't know what those women felt for him, but that she knew what she felt. She looked him in the eyes across that little white fence and she said it plainly, without performance or plea, "She doesn't love you like I do." The street was absolutely silent. Marcus felt the words land. Somewhere below his ribcage, somewhere he hadn't felt anything in a very long time. He didn't speak immediately, minus not because he was uncomfortable, but because something was happening inside him that required a moment to process. It was like a man who has been living in a dim room, suddenly having someone pull back the curtains, and needing a breath before he could see clearly. He thought about every evening on the porch, every cup of tea she had brought without being asked, every time she had laughed at something he said and he had felt, briefly, like the best version of himself. Every time he had gone inside and felt that hollow, nameless ache minus an ache he had mistaken for loneliness, but which he now understood, with sudden and almost overwhelming clarity, was the specific pain of being near something beautiful and not reaching for it. He stood up slowly from the porch steps. He walked across the small patch of grass between their houses and stopped at the other side of the fence. Directly in front of her, he could see everything on her face in that amber light, minus the courage it had taken to say what she said, the fear that was still living in her eyes, the years of quiet, patient, undemanding love that had simply been waiting. He told her that he had been so busy looking for something that he had been standing next to it the entire time. He told her that he thought he was the kind of person who needed dramatic signs and perfect moments, but that the truth was the sign had been chamomile tea at midnight, and a shared porch and laughter that reached somewhere real in him. He told her that he was sorry it took him this long to see it, but that he saw it now, clearly and completely, and he was not going to look away again. Diane's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She laughed instead, minus that deep, genuine, turn around on the street laugh, and it broke open the whole night. Marcus laughed too, and then they stood there, on either side of that little, white fence, laughing and a little bit crying, 2 people in their 40s who had somehow, improbably, been given a gift that most people spend their whole lives searching for and never find. The chance to love someone who already knew them completely. They didn't need grand gestures. They didn't need to start over or reinvent themselves. They just needed to stop being neighbors and start being honest. In the months that followed, their 2 porches became one shared life. The fence stayed minus. They agreed it had earned its place in their story, but they moved through it freely. The way you move through a space that belongs to you. Marcus learned that loving Diane felt nothing like trying. It felt like breathing, like coming inside from the cold, like finding the last page of the book and realizing the whole story had been pointing here. And on quiet evenings, when they sat together on the porch with their tea and the stars, Marcus would sometimes look over at her and feel a gratitude so large and so specific it was almost impossible to hold. Gratitude not just for her, but for the exact right moment she had held that fence and said the truest thing he had ever been told. She had loved him quietly for years, and one ordinary night, in the most ordinary way, that love had simply refused to stay quiet any longer. If this story moved something in you, minus if it reminded you that love is sometimes already standing in the yard next door, waiting with chamomile tea and a patient heart, minus please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, so you never miss a story like this one. Your heart led you here, for a reason. Before this story ends, minus drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever almost missed something beautiful because you were too busy looking somewhere else? I want to read every single one. Some love stories don't begin with lightning. They begin with a porch light, a shared fence, and one person finally being brave enough to say what they should have said a long time ago. The most extraordinary love you will ever find might not arrive in a dramatic, cinematic moment. It might be sitting next door, in a yellow house, with paint-stained fingers and a garden full of color, waiting minus not desperately, not bitterly, minus just waiting. The way all truly good things do. With patience, with faith. With a love so real it never needed to announce itself until the moment it finally did. And when it spoke, it changed everything.